Sir, just one ticket. Annie spoke in a trembling voice. Sir, I only need one inner-city bus ticket. Then she added softly, just one ticket. Nathaniel Whitmore looked up from the article he had been reading on his tablet. The girl standing before him was very young, perhaps 18 or 19 at most. Her thin coat had darkened from the rain. Her curls clung to both sides of her cheeks, and the hand gripping the handle of her suitcase would not stop shaking. Nathaniel glanced at the departure board above the ticket counter. Madison 6:25 p.m. boarding at gate 7. Then he gave a slight shake of his head. No, I'm sorry, I can't do that. Annie swallowed hard. Her eyes fell, but she did not cry or try to plead with him again. Yes, sir, I understand. She turned away. But instead of returning to the ticket counter, Annie sat down at the far end of Nathaniel's bench, deliberately leaving 2 empty seats between them. She placed her old suitcase close against her ankle, as though it were the last thing in the world she could still hold on to. Nathaniel lowered his gaze to the tablet again, but he did not read another word. A moment later, Annie spoke so quietly that he almost did not hear her. I'm sorry for bothering you. It's just, I truly don't have a single dollar left. Nathaniel turned toward her. Annie was clutching a clear plastic folder against her chest. The edges of the papers inside had begun to curl from the damp. I came here to buy a ticket, she said. Just after I walked in through the main entrance, 2 young men bumped into me hard. The papers in my hands scattered all over the floor. One of them even bent down and helped me pick them up. She released a weary breath and looked down at the folder. By the time I reached the ticket counter, my wallet was gone, my cash, my ID, my bank card, they took everything. Nathaniel had heard every variation of that story before, at airports, train stations, and parking lots. Some people claimed they had lost their wallets. Others said their phones had died. Still, others spoke of a child in the hospital. He had also seen kind-hearted strangers give money to someone in need, only to watch that same person approach another traveler minutes later with the exact same story. If they took your cash, Nathaniel said, you should still have money in your bank account. The ticket counter accepts mobile payments. Open your banking app, scan their payment code, and buy the ticket that way. Annie was silent for a few seconds. I can't. Your phone isn't working? It works, sir. Her voice grew quieter. I don't have enough money in my account. Nathaniel studied her for a long moment, uncertain whether the embarrassment on her face was genuine or simply well-practiced. How much is the ticket? $43. And you don't have $43 in your account? Annie took her phone from her coat pocket. The battery indicator on the screen was already red. She opened her banking app, covered her account number with her thumb, and held the screen out for Nathaniel to see. Available balance, $11.84. I don't get paid until Friday, Annie said. I work evenings at a laundromat. My grandmother helped me pay for the ticket. The money she gave me, it was all in that wallet. Nathaniel looked up at her. Why are you going to Madison? For a nursing scholarship interview, sir. The Florence Hale Nursing Scholarship. For a brief instant, a small spark of hope appeared in Annie's exhausted eyes. I made it to the final round of interviews. It's at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning in Madison. She glanced toward gate 7, where passengers had already begun lining up to board. If I miss this bus, I'll lose my chance. Is there no one else who can help you? Nathaniel asked. Your parents? A relative? You could call someone and have them transfer money into your account. Then you could pay for the ticket yourself. My mother died when I was 9. Annie's fingers tightened around the folder. I live with my grandmother. She was the one who gave me the money for the ticket. She had to take it out of her monthly spending money because I was still short. What about your father? Annie lowered her eyes. I don't know where he is. Nathaniel turned toward the rain-soaked windows. Outside, the lights of passing cars blurred behind the curtain of cold rain. I'm sorry, he said after a long silence, but places like this are complicated. Every day, people approach travelers with all kinds of stories. A stolen wallet, a sick family member, an important appointment they cannot miss, a child stranded somewhere. He paused, his voice still calm but growing colder. Some of those stories are true. Others are carefully invented to make quick money. I cannot help every person who asks me. Annie did not reply. She simply gave a small nod, as though she had heard words like those too many times before. Just then, a little boy in a red knit cap ran toward the bench. He could not have been more than 7 years old. A girl a few years older followed him, holding a crumpled paper cup in both hands. "Sir, could you give us some money for food?" the boy asked. Seconds later, 2 adults hurried up behind the children. The thin man wore a hooded jacket pulled low over his face. The woman held a purse tightly against her chest and spoke loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Sir, anything would help. We've been stuck here all afternoon. My children still haven't had anything to eat." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. He quickly shut off his tablet and slipped it into its leather case. "No," he said firmly. The man stepped closer. "Nice coat you've got there, friend. You can spare $10, can't you?" I said no. The girl pushed the paper cup a little closer. A few coins rattled weakly inside. Nathaniel rose abruptly to his feet. "That's enough. Go somewhere else. Do not crowd around me, and do not send children to beg strangers for money." His voice carried farther than he had intended. Several passengers nearby turned to look. The woman pulled the 2 children away, muttering something under her breath. The boy in the red cap looked back over his shoulder, his eyes frightened and confused. Annie watched the children leave in silence. "You didn't have to shout at them like that," she said. Nathaniel turned toward her, surprised that she had dared to speak. "They were only doing what the adults told them to do," Annie added. Nathaniel's expression hardened, but after a moment, something in his eyes softened slightly. "That is exactly why the adults should never have put them in that position." Annie lowered her head. A sad little smile passed across her lips. "I suppose you think I'm just like them now." "I didn't say that. You didn't have to." Annie stood and took hold of her suitcase handle. "I know what this looks like. A girl without a wallet, standing in a bus terminal with a sad story. In a place already full of stories like that." At that moment, the overhead speaker crackled to life. "Final boarding announcement for the bus to Madison. All passengers must report immediately to Gate 7. Annie closed her eyes for half a second. When she opened them again, she had forced herself to regain her composure. "I'm sorry I bothered you," she said. "Have a good evening, sir." She turned and began pulling her suitcase toward the ticket counter. Nathaniel watched her small figure move away. She had not used the commotion to pressure him further. She had not cried, begged, or tried to make him feel guilty. Even while facing the loss of the most important opportunity of her young life, she had still spoken up for 2 children who were being used by adults. "Wait," Nathaniel called. Annie stopped. He walked toward her. "Do you have your interview invitation with you?" For the first time since approaching him, Annie opened the plastic folder she had been holding against her chest. She took out a carefully arranged set of papers. An official interview invitation, her academic transcript, and a letter from Rosewood Senior Living confirming her volunteer hours. Nathaniel accepted them and read quickly. Her name was printed clearly at the top of the page. Annie Brooks. Below it was the interview time, 8 a.m. the following morning, Madison School of Nursing. He looked up at her. "Come with me." Before Annie could respond, Nathaniel turned toward the ticket counter. She pulled her suitcase after him, still unsure of what was happening. Russell Crane, the terminal's operations manager, spotted Nathaniel and immediately hurried out from the office behind the counter. A polite smile, almost mechanical in its perfection, was already fixed on his face. "Mr. Whitmore, is there a problem, sir?" Annie stopped short. Whitmore. She had heard that name somewhere before, on business news playing from the television at the laundromat during her night shifts. But she had never connected it with the man in the dark coat standing in front of her now. Nathaniel placed his credit card on the counter. 1 ticket to Madison, in her name. Russell Crane glanced at Annie, his eyes quickly sweeping over her wet coat, worn suitcase, and soaked shoes. "Sir, we cannot verify every hardship claim made by passengers in this terminal." Nathaniel turned slowly toward him. "She just verified her information in front of me." His voice remained calm, but it was sharp enough to wipe the smile from Russell's face. "Perhaps the real problem is that no one here bothered to ask her properly in the first place." Russell fell silent. The ticket clerk quickly began entering the information into the computer. The printer beneath the counter whirred to life. "Your name?" the clerk asked. "Annie Brooks," she answered, her voice still trembling. The moment Nathaniel heard her last name, his eyes lingered on Annie's face. For the briefest instant, something moved across his expression: surprise, perhaps, or the sudden stirring of a memory. But before he could ask anything, the clerk handed over the ticket. Annie accepted it with both hands. as though it were not merely a piece of paper, but her entire future being returned to her. "Thank you, sir," she said, her eyes beginning to redden. "If I get that scholarship, I'll save up and take you out for a wonderful dinner." For the first time that evening, Nathaniel smiled. It was only a faint smile, but it was enough to soften the coldness in his face. "Then you had better make it to that interview, Annie Brooks." Annie nodded firmly. Gripping the handle of her suitcase, she hurried toward Gate 7. The boarding attendant took her ticket just as the bus doors were about to close. Annie climbed aboard, then turned and looked back through the window. Nathaniel was still standing beside the ticket counter. She placed one hand against the glass and gave him a small nod, a final thank you she no longer had words for. He nodded back. A few seconds later, the intercity bus slowly pulled away from the terminal and rolled out into the curtain of freezing rain. Nathaniel remained exactly where he was, watching until the red taillights disappeared from view. The intercity bus pulled away from Gate 7 and slowly rolled into the cold, damp Milwaukee night. Through the terminal windows, streaked with sleet, its red taillights faded and disappeared into the traffic outside. Nathaniel Whitmore remained near the ticket counter, watching long after there was any reason to. He folded the ticket receipt and quietly slipped it into his coat pocket. "That was very generous of you." Nathaniel turned. The terminal's operations manager stood a few steps away, his name badge reflecting the harsh white glow of the fluorescent lights overhead. "Russell Crane," the man said, extending his hand. "I manage this terminal." Nathaniel shook it once, briefly. "Nathaniel Whitmore." The smile on Russell's face brightened far too quickly. "Of course, Mr. Whitmore." His voice instantly grew warmer. "I understand your company may be looking at properties in this part of the city." Nathaniel regarded him cautiously. That was precisely why he had come alone. He did not want a carefully arranged tour, floors hastily polished for his arrival, or a manager who suddenly remembered how to treat passengers with respect only after discovering who was watching. "I am considering a few options," Nathaniel said. Russell glanced toward Gate 7, where Annie's bus had just departed. "I hope that young lady did not give you the wrong impression of this terminal. Holiday travel tends to bring all kinds of situations through our doors." "She said her wallet was stolen." "Yes, she did say that." Russell adjusted his tie. "But as you know, many people find themselves short on travel money. Sometimes telling a stranger they were robbed is easier than admitting they did not plan ahead." Nathaniel did not answer. He could still see Annie holding out her phone with its nearly dead battery, showing him the $11.84 left in her account. Russell continued. "In any case, it was very kind of you to help her." Nathaniel slowly turned his head toward him. "You speak as though you have already decided she was lying." "I speak as someone who has worked in this terminal for 12 years. Before Nathaniel could respond, a burst of laughter came from near the vending machines. Two young men entered through the main doors, brushing sleet from their jackets as they walked. One wore a black hoodie pulled low over his forehead. The other wore a tan work jacket and kept glancing over his shoulder, as if checking whether anyone had followed them inside. What caught Nathaniel's attention was that neither of them headed toward the ticket counter or any departure gate. They walked straight toward the row of seats where Annie had been sitting only minutes earlier. The young man in the tan jacket reached inside his coat, pulled out a brown leather wallet, and opened it while he was still walking. Nathaniel took a step forward. At that exact moment, a folded piece of paper slipped from the wallet, fluttered down to the tile floor, and skidded to a stop beside the leg of the bench. The young man cursed and bent down immediately. But Nathaniel was closer. He picked it up first. It was a Wisconsin state identification card. The photograph on it was Annie's. Nathaniel looked at the card in his hand, then directly at the wallet the young man was holding. "Give me that wallet." The young man froze. The one in the black hoodie muttered, "Come on, man. Let's go." Then he turned sharply toward a side exit. Nathaniel raised his voice. "Security, stop those two men." But no one reacted quickly enough. The man in the black hoodie pushed past a family struggling with several large suitcases and ran for the door. His partner shoved the wallet back inside his jacket and sprinted after him. Nathaniel pulled out his phone and immediately dialed 911. Russell Crane hurried forward, nearly blocking Nathaniel's view of the exit. "Mr. Whitmore, there is no need to turn this into a spectacle. Our security staff can handle this misunderstanding." Nathaniel kept his eyes fixed on the door through which the two men had just fled, waiting for the call to connect. "This is not a misunderstanding." When the dispatcher answered, Nathaniel provided the name of the terminal, its address, the location of the exit, and a detailed description of the two young men. "I personally saw one of them holding a stolen wallet," he said clearly. The owner's identification fell out of it. "The victim is a young passenger who just boarded a bus to Madison." The welcoming smile Russell Crane had worn only moments before was now completely gone. Nathaniel ended the call only after the dispatcher confirmed that police were on their way. He carefully slipped Annie's identification card into his briefcase. "You should turn that over to terminal management," Russell said. "We are responsible for safeguarding lost passenger property." Nathaniel looked at him. "Are you?" Russell pressed his lips together. "I'm not sure what you mean by that. A young woman said she had been robbed inside this terminal, and you allowed her to fend for herself." Minutes later, two men returned carrying her wallet. Nathaniel took half a step closer. "From the beginning, you were not concerned about a passenger's safety. You were concerned about how this terminal might look to me. I never personally spoke to that girl about a theft." "No," Nathaniel said, "and that may be the most disturbing part. You were close enough to see that she was stranded here, yet it never occurred to you to ask why." Russell straightened his posture, struggling to regain his professional composure. "Mr. Whitmore, if you intend to evaluate this facility in that manner, perhaps a formal appointment would be more appropriate." Just then, a custodian pushing a trash cart stopped beside the row of seats. He glanced down at the floor, then called out to Nathaniel. "Sir, I believe there are more papers under here." Nathaniel immediately walked over. Beneath the bench lay two folded sheets of paper. One corner had been stepped on, leaving it damp and dirty. He bent down and picked them up. The first was a copy of Annie's volunteer identification badge from Rosewood Senior Living. The second was a printed page bearing the heading, "Florence Hale, Nursing Scholarship, Final Interview Confirmation." Beneath it was her name, Annie Brooks, and her appointment time, 8 a.m. Madison, Wisconsin. Nathaniel slowly rose to his feet. Until that moment, some small, guarded part of him had still left room for doubt. Even after buying Annie's ticket, even after beginning to believe her, the instincts of a man who had spent too many years surrounded by negotiations, manipulation, and deceit had kept him from fully lowering his guard. But now, every trace of doubt disappeared. He remembered Annie's voice as she had looked toward Gate 7. "If I miss this bus, I'll lose my chance." She had not told him a story to earn his pity. She had simply told him the truth, and almost no one had been willing to believe her. If Annie's story touched your heart, please like this video, tell us in the comments where you are watching from, and subscribe to our channel for more stories of kindness, truth, and justice. The terminal's main doors swung open. An older police officer entered with a younger partner beside him, both brushing sleet from the shoulders of their uniforms as they walked in. Nathaniel raised his hand. "I'm the one who called." The older officer removed a small notebook from his pocket. "Tell me what you saw." Nathaniel clearly described the two young men, the wallet, the identification card, and the direction in which they had fled. When he handed over Annie's ID and the other papers he had recovered, the officer's eyes lingered on the scholarship confirmation. "Do you have any way to contact this young woman?" "She is on a bus to Madison that left only a few minutes ago," Nathaniel said. "I bought her ticket." The younger officer turned toward Russell Crane. "We will need access to all security footage from this terminal, especially the main entrance, the ticket counter, and the waiting area." Russell gave a strained nod. "Of course, whatever you need." Nathaniel could hear the tension compressed into every word. The older officer looked back at him. "Mr. Whitmore, will you be available to stay and continue speaking with us?" Nathaniel looked down at Annie's interview confirmation in the officer's hand. Somewhere out there, the young woman was riding alone through the sleet, completely unaware that her wallet had been found, and unaware that the men who had robbed her might have done the same thing to others before her. "Yes," Nathaniel said. Then he turned toward Russell Crane, his expression turning cold. "I am not leaving until I know how many times those men have done this, and how many people in this terminal chose to look the other way." The intercity coach had been on Interstate 94 for 20 minutes before Annie let herself believe it was no longer going to turn back. She sat beside the window with her suitcase tucked beneath her knees and the plastic folder resting flat in her lap. Beyond the glass, Milwaukee thinned into wet pavement, warehouse lights and dark fields broken by signs for gas stations and late-night diners. Sleet struck the window in short bursts, then slid away. She unfolded the ticket again, though she already knew every printed line on it. Milwaukee to Madison. Departure, 6:12. 10:25 p.m. Seat 18A. Passenger, Annie Brooks. She thought of the man in the gray coat. She had not even asked his name. He had spent $43 on a girl who had approached him in a terminal with a story he had every reason to question. At first he had refused, and she could not blame him for that. What stayed with her was that he had changed his mind. Her phone vibrated weakly in her coat pocket, 2% battery. There was one new voicemail from her grandmother. Annie hesitated before pressing play. "Baby, it is Grandma. I know you are probably on the coach by now. I put an extra napkin in with those sandwiches because you always forget one. Call me when you get to Madison. Even if it is late, I will be awake. I love you." Annie lowered the phone before the recording ended. She looked down at the foil-wrapped sandwiches in her suitcase and blinked until the lights outside settled again. She could not tell her grandmother about the wallet tonight. Not before the interview. Ava would worry until morning. And there was nothing either of them could do from different cities except lose sleep. The woman across the aisle noticed Annie wiping her cheek with the back of her hand and offered a tissue from her purse. "Long day?" she asked. Annie accepted it. "Yes, ma'am." The woman nodded as if that was enough explanation. She was somewhere in her 70s, with silver hair tucked beneath a knitted cream hat and a red wool scarf wrapped neatly around her neck. A leather handbag sat on her lap, and the paperback in her hand had not moved past the same page since the coach left Milwaukee. "Thanksgiving travel has a way of testing people before they even get where they are going," she said. Annie managed to smile. "I am not going home for Thanksgiving. I have an interview in the morning." "What kind of interview?" "A nursing scholarship." The woman's eyebrows rose. "Nursing?" "Yes, ma'am." "Then you chose work that matters." She extended a gloved hand across the aisle. "Helen Porter." "Annie Brooks." Helen smiled. "Pleased to meet you, Annie Brooks." The coach passed Oconomowoc, then continued west. The interior lights dimmed, and several passengers leaned against windows or tucked their coats beneath their heads. Annie tried to review the questions in her folder. Why nursing? Describe a difficult situation. What does patient dignity mean to you? She had prepared answers for all of them, but the words now looked stiff on the page, as if written by a girl whose wallet had not been stolen and whose future had never depended on a stranger's credit card. She read the first question 3 times without absorbing it. Across the aisle, Helen shifted in her seat. The book slid from her lap and struck the floor. Annie looked over. Helen had one hand pressed against her upper chest. Her other hand searched unsteadily through her handbag. "Mrs. Porter?" Helen did not answer at first. Her breathing had grown shallow. Annie unbuckled herself and moved into the aisle. "Are you having chest pain?" Helen shook her head once. "Breathing. My inhaler. Blue pouch." Annie knelt beside the seat and opened the handbag carefully, keeping her voice level. "I am looking for it. Stay upright for me." A man 2 rows ahead turned around. "Everything all right?" "She needs her inhaler," Annie said. "Please tell the driver we may need to pull over if this does not improve." The man moved toward the front. Annie found a small blue zippered pouch beneath a folded magazine. Inside was an inhaler and a card listing medications. She handed the inhaler to Helen, who tried to use it, but her hand shook too badly to position it. "May I help you hold it?" Annie asked. Helen nodded. Annie steadied the inhaler without taking control from her. "Slow breath out first. Now inhale when you press. Good. Again when you are ready." The driver's voice came over the speaker. "Do we need emergency services?" Annie watched Helen's face. Her breathing remained tight but no longer seemed to be worsening. "Please be ready to stop," Annie called toward the front. "Give her a minute after the inhaler." A younger woman seated behind Helen held out a bottle of water. "Not yet," Annie said gently. "Let her catch her breath first." No one argued. The coach had gone quiet except for the sound of the tires moving over wet road. After another minute, Helen's shoulders began to lower. Color returned slowly to her cheeks. "There," Helen whispered. "Better." Annie stayed crouched beside her. "Do you have asthma?" "Chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. Cold air sets it off sometimes." Helen closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them. "You handled that well. I volunteer at a senior living center. That explains the calm, not the instinct." The driver stopped at the next lit service plaza and came back to check on Helen. She insisted she did not need an ambulance, only a few minutes before continuing. Annie remained beside her while the driver called the dispatch nurse listed in the company's travel policy. When the call ended and Helen was cleared to continue if she felt stable, passengers returned to their seats with the subdued relief of people who had just remembered how quickly an ordinary trip could change. Helen reached across the aisle and touched Annie's folder. "You said your interview is for a scholarship." "Yes." "Where?" "The Florence Hale program." Helen gave a small, surprised laugh. "I taught clinical nursing for 26 years. I knew Florence Hale before she retired." Annie stared at her. "You did?" "I did." She had no patience for applicants who memorized impressive answers and no sense for people. Helen looked at Annie for a long moment. "You will not have that problem." Annie lowered her eyes. "I almost did not make this coach. But you did. Only because someone bought my ticket." Helen leaned back against her seat. "Most people reach important places because somebody helped once. That does not mean you did not earn what happens after you arrive." The words were so close to what Nathaniel had said that Annie felt them settle somewhere she had been holding tight all evening. Near midnight, the coach reached the Madison terminal. The sleet had become a fine, cold rain. Annie helped Helen down the steps and carried her handbag until Helen's daughter hurried over from the pickup lane. Before leaving, Helen took Annie's hand. "Go to your interview tomorrow," she said. "Tell them why you want to be a nurse. Do not spend 1 minute apologizing for how you got there." Annie nodded. "Thank you, Mrs. Porter." Helen smiled. "No, child, thank you." Annie stood beneath the awning after they drove away, her suitcase beside her and the folder held firmly against her coat. She had no wallet, no cash, and almost no charge left in her phone. But she had arrived. She connected to the terminal's charging station long enough to send one message to her grandmother, made it safely. "Interview in the morning. I love you." Then she opened the foil around one of Ava's sandwiches, sat beneath the station lights, and began reading her interview notes again. This time, when she reached the question about patient dignity, she no longer needed the answer she had written at home. At 6:15 the next morning, Annie stood in the restroom of the Madison coach terminal, with her interview blouse hanging from a hook on the stall door and her phone charging from an outlet beside the sink. She had slept in short pieces on a bench near the ticket office, waking each time the doors opened and cold air swept through the building. Her neck ached. Her eyes looked tired. None of that mattered as much as the folded letter on the counter beside her. She changed out of her damp travel clothes, smoothed her blouse beneath her jacket, and tied her hair back with the plain black ribbon her grandmother had placed in the side pocket of the suitcase. When she opened the second foil package, she found one of Ava's oatmeal cookies tucked beneath the sandwich with a note written on a paper napkin. "For after the interview. Proud of you already." Annie read it twice, folded it into her folder and ate half the sandwich standing near the window. At 7:10, she boarded a city shuttle toward the downtown medical education building where the Florence Hale interviews were being held. The building had glass doors, polished floors, and a lobby so quiet Annie became aware of every small sound she made. Her suitcase wheels, the zipper of her folder, the click of her shoes. A sign directed scholarship applicants to the 3rd floor. At the registration table, a woman with reading glasses smiled at her. "Good morning. Name?" "Annie Brooks. 8 o'clock interview." The woman checked a list. "Yes, here you are. I will need your photo identification before you sign in." Annie had known this moment was coming. Still, hearing the words made her stomach drop. "My wallet was stolen last night at the coach terminal in Milwaukee," she said. "My driver's license was inside." The smile faded into professional concern. "Do you have another government-issued ID?" "No, ma'am. I have a photocopy of my birth certificate, my interview letter, my school transcript, and my volunteer identification." The woman examined the documents Annie laid on the table. "I am sorry, Miss Brooks. These establish your application, but the rules require photo identification for the final interview." "I understand the rule," Annie said. "Please call my high school. Call Rosewood Senior Living. My volunteer supervisor can confirm who I am. I came all the way from Milwaukee because this interview matters." A man seated behind the registration table glanced up. "What happened to the police report?" "I did not have time to file one before my coach left. If I had stayed, I would not be here now." The woman exchanged a look with him. "Please take a seat. I need to speak with the interview chair." Annie thanked her, because her grandmother had raised her to thank people even when they were placing another closed door in front of her. She sat with her suitcase against her leg. Across the hall, 3 other applicants waited in pressed suits and clean winter coats, each with a folder resting neatly on a lap. One young woman held a leather portfolio with her initials stamped on the front. Annie placed her hands over the frayed edge of her own plastic folder and tried not to compare what everybody had carried into the room. At 7:37, her phone rang. It was Ava. "Baby, why are you whispering?" her grandmother asked. "I am at the interview building." "You made it. I knew you would." Annie closed her eyes. She wanted to leave it there, to let Ava have that clean moment of pride. Instead, she said, "Grandma, somebody stole my wallet at the station last night." There was a pause. "Your money? And my ID?" "Oh, Annie, a man bought my ticket. I made it here, but they may not let me interview without identification." Ava was silent for a few seconds. When she spoke again, her voice was steady. "Listen to me. You tell them the truth once, clearly. You show them what you have. Then you sit up straight. Do not look guilty for being robbed." Annie looked down at her knees. "What if it is not enough? Then they will have made a mistake. But you will not make it for them by shrinking in that chair." Before Annie could answer, the elevator doors opened down the hall. Helen Porter stepped out beside a middle-aged woman carrying her handbag. Helen wore a burgundy coat now, and her breathing sounded easier than it had on the coach. Her face brightened when she saw Annie. "There she is," Helen said. "I was hoping I might see you before your interview." Annie stood. "Mrs. Porter, are you feeling better?" "Much. My daughter insisted on driving me to my committee breakfast." Helen nodded toward the registration table. "You look worried." Annie tried to smile. "There is a problem with my ID." The woman at the table rose when she heard Helen's voice. "Professor Porter, good morning." Helen lifted an eyebrow. "Professor was a long time ago, Susan. What is the problem?" Susan explained in a low voice that Annie's identification had been stolen, and the committee could not verify her identity before the interview. Helen looked at Annie. "Is that why you almost missed the coach?" "Yes, ma'am. And yet you spent part of the ride helping me breathe instead of worrying about yourself." Annie felt every head in the waiting area turn toward them. Helen addressed Susan. "I cannot certify who she is according to your paperwork, but I can tell you what kind of applicant is standing here. Last night, when I could not draw a full breath, this young woman found my inhaler, kept the passengers calm, and knew enough not to pour water into someone who was struggling to breathe. She did not know my name or my former position. She simply helped." Susan softened, but still shook her head. "The documentation requirement is not mine to waive." "Then find the person who can waive it," Helen said. "Meanwhile, call her school." Annie's phone rang again before Susan could reply. This time the screen showed an unfamiliar Milwaukee number. "Hello? May I speak with Annie Brooks?" a man asked. "This is Annie." "Miss Brooks, this is Officer Daniel Ruiz with Milwaukee Transit Police. A gentleman at the terminal recovered your identification card after observing 2 suspects with your wallet. We have your documents secured here. I can email confirmation of recovery and a copy of my incident record to any address you provide." Annie gripped the phone with both hands. "You found my ID?" "Yes, ma'am. Your cash was not recovered, but your identification and several papers were located." Tears pressed behind Annie's eyes, but she kept her voice together long enough to hand the phone to Susan. Within 12 minutes, the officer's email arrived. Rosewood Senior Living confirmed Annie's volunteer badge. Her high school counselor confirmed her identity and transcript. At 7:58, Susan placed a sign-in sheet before her. "You are cleared for your interview, Miss Brooks." Annie signed her name carefully. As she gathered her folder, Helen touched her arm. "When they ask why nursing, do not give them the answer you practiced all week." Annie looked at her. "What should I tell them?" Helen smiled. "Tell them what you did last night, and why you did not have to think about doing it." At 8 o'clock, Annie entered a room with 3 committee members seated behind a long table. Her clothes were inexpensive, her eyes were tired, and her wallet was still in police custody 2 cities away. But when the chairwoman welcomed her and asked why she wanted to become a nurse, Annie no longer searched for the polished paragraph she had memorized. She thought of her mother's hospital room, of Helen Porter trying to breathe, of her grandmother's paper napkin folded inside her folder. Then she began to speak. The first question came from a woman with silver-framed glasses and a legal pad filled with notes. "Miss Brooks, your application says you began volunteering at Rosewood Senior Living after your mother passed away. Why did that experience lead you toward nursing?" Annie kept her hands folded in her lap. so the committee would not see them tremble. My mother died before I was old enough to understand most of what was happening to her, she said. But I remember the people who came into her room. Some entered, checked a machine, wrote something down and left. One nurse stayed long enough to explain things to me. She did not make promises she could not keep. She just made the room less frightening. The man seated in the center looked up from her application. And last night? Professor Porter told us you assisted her on the coach. Annie had not expected Helen's account to reach the room before she did. Mrs. Porter could not catch her breath. She knew where her inhaler was, so I helped her reach it and made sure the driver knew what was happening. You sound modest about it, the third committee member said. I was not trying to become part of my interview, Annie answered. She needed help. For the first time, the silver-haired woman smiled. The remaining questions were about grades, work schedules, clinical pressure, and what Annie would do if the scholarship covered school, but did not erase the demands waiting at home. Annie told them she expected to keep working part-time. She spoke about her grandmother's arthritis, the apartment they shared, and the way a person learned discipline when missing one shift meant missing part of the electric bill. When the interview ended, the chairwoman rose and shook her hand. We will make final decisions within 3 weeks. Whatever happens, you conducted yourself well this morning. Annie thanked them and stepped into the hallway. Helen Porter was gone, but the registration woman handed her a small envelope. Professor Porter left this for you. Inside was a business card with a handwritten message on the back. A nurse notices the person before the problem. Keep going. Helen Porter. Annie held the card against her folder for a moment, then called her grandmother. Ava answered before the second ring. Tell me they let you in. They let me in. And? I think I did all right. Annie Brooks, I have known you 18 years. All right means either you fell through the floor or you did better than you are ready to admit. Annie laughed, the first real laugh since entering the terminal the night before. I answered everything. Then come home. I have been walking from the window to the telephone all morning, and my knees are charging me for it. I will be home this evening. Ava grew quieter. The police found your identification? Yes, an officer called before the interview. He said I can pick up my wallet when I get back. Your money? No. Ava sighed, but there was no anger in it. Money leaves. Papers come back. You made the interview. We will start from there. The scholarship program arranged Annie's return fare after learning what had happened. By late afternoon, she was seated on another intercity coach heading east toward Milwaukee. Her folder zipped safely inside her suitcase and Helen Porter's card in her coat pocket. She slept for part of the ride and woke as city lights appeared beyond the rain-dark windows. At the Milwaukee terminal, the first person Annie saw was not her grandmother or a police officer. It was the man in the gray coat. He stood near the same row of metal seats where she had asked him for help, holding a small brown wallet in one hand. For a second, Annie only stared. Then she pulled her suitcase from beneath the coach and hurried toward him. You are still here? Nathaniel Whitmore gave a faint smile. Not continuously. I had a few calls to make. She stopped in front of him, suddenly aware that she still did not know what to call him. I never asked your name. Nathaniel Whitmore. Mr. Whitmore. She held out her hand. I am glad I can thank you properly now. He shook it. How was the interview? Annie looked down, then allowed herself a smile. I got into the room. I answered their questions. A woman I helped on the coach turned out to be a retired nursing professor, and she spoke for me when they were unsure about my missing identification. Nathaniel Whitmore nodded slowly. Then it seems you made good use of the ticket. Annie opened her suitcase and removed a small paper bag. I brought you something. It is not the dinner I promised. That part still depends on the scholarship. He accepted the bag and looked inside. A wrapped turkey sandwich and an oatmeal cookie sat beside a folded napkin. My grandmother packed 2 sandwiches. I saved one for you. Nathaniel Whitmore seemed unsure what to say. You had very little with you, Annie. I had enough to share one. The answer left him quiet. He handed her the wallet. The police recovered this after 2 young men returned to the terminal. Your cash was already gone, but your identification and cards appear to be inside. Annie took it, her breath catching as she opened the worn snap. Her state identification was there. Her debit card. Her library card. Behind them, tucked into the clear plastic sleeve, was the small photograph she had been afraid she would never see again. Her mother stood outside a church picnic, laughing at something beyond the edge of the picture. with Annie on one hip in a yellow summer dress. Annie touched the photograph with one finger. "I thought this was gone," she said. Nathaniel Whitmore's attention had shifted from her face to the photograph. "Is that your mother?" "Yes." Annie removed the picture carefully and turned it so he could see it. Evelyn Brooks. The color changed in his face. He did not take the photograph. He only looked at it, then at Annie, as if something from years earlier had just entered the terminal and stood between them. "Evelyn Brooks," he repeated. Annie frowned. "Did you know her?" Before he could answer, Russell Crane emerged from the service corridor with a police officer behind him. The manager's attention went first to the wallet in Annie's hand, then to Nathaniel Whitmore. Nathaniel Whitmore folded the paper bag closed and held it carefully at his side. "I believe," he said, without looking away from Russell Crane, "there are two conversations we need to have. One about your mother, the other about what happened to you in this terminal." The police officer stopped beside Russell Crane and held up a small notebook. "Mr. Crane, I need access to the service area and your incident records for this evening." Russell Crane kept his eyes on Nathaniel Whitmore. "Certainly, officer. We cooperate fully with law enforcement here." Annie heard the smoothness in his voice and remembered how little patience he had shown when she stood at the counter without a ticket. Now that a man in an expensive coat was watching, Russell Crane sounded as if helping stranded passengers had always been his first concern. The officer turned to Annie. "Miss Brooks, I am glad you made it back. We recovered your wallet from the terminal, but I will still need a full statement. It can be tonight or tomorrow morning, whichever is easier." "Tonight," Annie said. "I would rather do it tonight." Nathaniel Whitmore looked toward the doors. "Does your grandmother know you are back?" "She expects me soon. I told her I would take the city coach from here." "With sleet coming down and your wallet just returned from a police evidence bag?" He picked up the paper sack containing the sandwich she had saved for him. "Let me take you home. You can tell the officer where to reach you, and he can arrange your statement after you have spoken to your grandmother." Annie hesitated. Her grandmother had taught her to be careful with strangers, even kind ones. But Nathaniel Whitmore had purchased her fare, waited for her return, and helped recover the photograph in her wallet. More than that, she wanted an answer to the way he had repeated her mother's name. "All right," she said, "but my grandmother will ask questions." "I would expect her to." Russell Crane stepped forward. "Mr. Whitmore, before you leave, perhaps we should discuss your interest in the terminal. I would not want an isolated incident to affect your assessment." Nathaniel Whitmore faced him. "A stolen wallet is an incident. A young woman reporting a theft and being dismissed is a decision. I am beginning to wonder how many decisions like that have been made here." Russell Crane's jaw tightened. The officer glanced from one man to the other before saying, "Mr. Crane, the records." Nathaniel Whitmore held the door for Annie, and they stepped into the cold. His car was parked across the street, a dark sedan without a driver waiting at the curb. Annie gave him directions through streets she knew by laundromats, corner stores, and the church basement, where Ava attended Wednesday Bible study. Nathaniel Whitmore did not speak until they turned onto her block. "Did your mother ever mention the Whitmore family?" Annie shook her head. "She died when I was 9. Most of what I know comes from my grandmother. My mother worked in home care before she got sick. She worked for my family." Annie turned toward him. "You knew her?" "I was 27. My mother had cancer. Her name was Margaret Whitmore." He tightened both hands on the wheel. "Your mother came to our house 3 days a week, some weeks more than that." Annie stared ahead at the windshield wipers sweeping away wet snow. "What did she do there?" "What she was hired to do at first. Help my mother bathe, take medication, eat properly. After a while, she did things no invoice could have accounted for." His voice lowered. "She opened the curtains every morning because my mother hated waking in a dark room. She fixed her hair before visitors came. She made her soup when chemotherapy made everything taste wrong. She reminded me to sit down and speak to my mother instead of standing in the doorway asking whether she needed anything." Annie looked down at the wallet in her lap. Her mother's photograph was back inside it, safe behind a plastic window. "She never told us." "I am not surprised." "Why?" "Because she never behaved as though goodness required an audience." Nathaniel Whitmore stopped in front of a brick apartment building with chipped concrete steps and a porch light glowing above the entryway. Annie saw the curtain in the second-floor window move. Ava had been watching for her. "She is going to worry when she sees this car," Annie said. "Then we should not keep her waiting." Ava opened the apartment door before Annie reached it. She wore a cream cardigan over her house dress, one hand holding the doorframe to steady her arthritic knee. "Annie, child. You should have called from downstairs. I have been watching every set of headlights on this street." She pulled Annie into her arms, then immediately held her at arm's length. "Did you eat? Did they treat you fairly? Where is your wallet?" "I have it back." Annie took it out. "And I made the interview." Ava closed her eyes in relief. "Thank the Lord." Then she noticed Nathaniel Whitmore standing a few steps behind Annie with her suitcase in one hand and the small paper sack in the other. "Grandma, this is Nathaniel Whitmore. He bought my fare after my wallet was taken. He also helped the police recover it." Ava's expression changed at the surname. "Whitmore?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am." Ava looked at him more carefully. "Margaret Whitmore's son?" Nathaniel Whitmore gave a small nod. "You knew my mother?" Ava stepped back from the doorway. "Come inside before the cold gets into everybody's bones." The apartment smelled of chicken soup, onions, and cornbread warming in the oven. A radio on the kitchen counter played low enough that the singer sounded almost like memory. Nathaniel Whitmore set Annie's suitcase beside the sofa and remained standing until Ava pointed toward the kitchen table. "A man who got my granddaughter safely home does not stand in the doorway. Sit down, Mr. Whitmore." He obeyed. Annie hung her coat on the back of a chair. "Grandma," he knew Mom. Ava did not appear surprised. She took 3 bowls from the cabinet. "Your mother spent a year caring for Mrs. Whitmore," she said. "Maybe longer. Toward the end, she was there nearly every day. Why did you never tell me?" Ava ladled soup into the bowls. "Because it was work your mother loved, not a legend she left behind. She cared for many people." Nathaniel Whitmore placed his leather document case on the table. From it, he removed a small silver tin box, dented at one corner. "My mother kept this beside her bed," he said. "I have had it since she passed." Ava stopped moving. Nathaniel Whitmore opened the lid and took out a photograph. Annie reached for it slowly. Her mother stood beside a thin white woman on the porch of a small house. Evelyn was younger than Annie had ever remembered her, wearing pale blue work clothes, her smile easy and open. The woman beside her rested one hand on Evelyn's arm, not as a patient holding on to an aid, but as one friend holding another. On the back, in faded handwriting, were the words, "Evelyn Brooks, the woman who kept this family human." Annie sat down without meaning to. Nathaniel Whitmore spoke quietly. "Your mother was with mine when I was too busy convincing myself that paying for care was the same as giving it." Ava set a bowl of soup before him. "Regret does not feed anyone, Mr. Whitmore," she said. "But what a person does after regret can." Nathaniel Whitmore looked at Annie. "I did not know who you were when I purchased your ticket. I want you to understand that." Annie held the photograph by its edges. "Why does that matter to you?" "Because you needed help as Annie Brooks, not as someone whose mother once helped mine." For several seconds, nobody spoke. Outside, sleet tapped against the kitchen window. Inside, the soup steamed between them, and Annie looked at a photograph that had given her back a part of her mother she had not known was missing. Annie kept the photograph beside her bowl until the soup had gone cool. She had spent years trying to build a picture of her mother from what little remained. A church picnic photograph in her wallet, an old bottle of hand lotion in Ava's dresser, a few stories about how Evelyn used to sing while washing dishes. None of those memories had placed her inside another family's kitchen, caring for a sick woman while her own life waited at home. Nathaniel Whitmore ate quietly, as though he understood that anything he said too soon would take up space that belonged to Evelyn. A knock came at the apartment door. Ava looked at Annie. "Were you expecting anybody?" Annie shook her head. When she opened the door, the police officer from the telephone call stood in the hallway, cap tucked beneath his arm. He introduced himself as Officer Daniel Ruiz and apologized for arriving during dinner. "I can come back tomorrow," he said. "I only wanted to return 2 cards that were still held separately from the wallet and ask whether Miss Brooks feels able to make a statement tonight." Annie glanced toward the table. The photograph was still in her hand. "I can do it tonight." Officer Ruiz stepped inside after Ava invited him in and took the chair closest to the door. He accepted a cup of coffee but declined soup, explaining that his partner was waiting downstairs. Nathaniel Whitmore moved his bowl aside and remained silent while Annie told the story from the beginning. Entering the terminal, checking the departure board, the collision near the entrance, the papers on the tile, the missing wallet at the ticket counter, the man in the black hoodie appearing again before she boarded. Officer Ruiz wrote steadily, When you saw him the second time, were you certain it was the same person? He asked. Yes. Same black hoodie. White stitching near the pocket. He looked at me and walked away as soon as I said I recognized him. Did either man speak to you during the collision? One told me to watch where I was going. The other handed my papers back. Nathaniel Whitmore looked down at the tin box. Making her remember him is helpful. Officer Ruiz nodded. It is a common distraction. Annie felt foolish all over again. I thanked him. That is not foolish, Officer Ruiz said. You believed someone was helping you. That is on him, not you. The simple fairness of the answer caught Annie off guard. Officer Ruiz continued. Mr. Whitmore recovered your identification after seeing the same two men return to the station. We are requesting the terminal recordings and checking other complaints from recent months. Other complaints? Annie asked. There have been reports of wallets disappearing near the ticket counters. We do not know yet whether they are connected. Ava set her coffee mug down. People reported thefts, and no one caught those boys before tonight? Officer Ruiz chose his words carefully. Sometimes people leave before filing a full report. Sometimes they think losing a bus fare or a few dollars is not worth the trouble. Sometimes they are treated as though they misplaced their belongings instead of having them stolen. Annie thought of Russell Crane telling her that her missed trip was not the terminal's responsibility. Nathaniel Whitmore heard the same meaning. You will have full cooperation from me. I saw one of the men holding her wallet. Officer Ruiz wrote down Nathaniel Whitmore's contact information, then turned back to Annie. There is another matter. If this becomes an investigation, your name may appear in a police report. You are entitled to know that before you sign a statement. Annie looked at the papers he placed in front of her. Her scholarship application was still being considered. She had no idea whether a police report helped prove her honesty or only made her life appear complicated. Can I think about it tonight? Of course. Nothing requires you to sign now. Your property has been returned. And I already have Mr. Whitmore's witness account. But your statement could matter if other victims were treated the same way. After Officer Ruiz left, Annie stood at the sink rinsing bowls she did not need to rinse yet. The kitchen was too small for pacing, and running water gave her something to do with her hands. Nathaniel Whitmore closed the tin box. You do not owe me involvement in this investigation because I purchased your ticket. I know. You also do not owe the terminal your silence because they made you feel embarrassed. Annie shut off the faucet. It is easy for you to say that. If your name is in a police report, people call it business. If mine is, people may decide I am trouble before they ever meet me. Nathaniel Whitmore did not interrupt. She dried her hands on a dish towel. I applied for a scholarship. They are deciding whether I am responsible enough to train as a nurse. What if this turns into a story about me asking a rich man for a ticket and then getting involved in a criminal case? Ava, still seated at the table, folded the photograph into a clean napkin before placing it beside the tin box. Come sit down, Annie. I am not a child, Grandma. I know. That is why I am asking instead of telling. Annie returned to her chair. Ava placed the brown wallet between them. Those boys did not choose you because you looked weak. They chose you because you were alone, in a hurry, and unlikely to be believed after they took what you had. Mr. Crane helped them by deciding what kind of girl you were before he knew your name. Annie stared at the worn leather snap. Ava continued, You can walk away from this. I will not think less of you, but somewhere there may be another girl sitting in another terminal with an appointment she will never reach because nobody wanted to hear her clearly. Nathaniel Whitmore lowered his gaze, allowing Ava's words to stand on their own. Annie touched the returned identification card. It had cost her nothing to carry it the day before. Now it felt like evidence that she had existed in that station exactly as she said she had. What happens if I give a statement? She asked. Nathaniel Whitmore answered only after Ava nodded permission for him to speak. The police investigate. If the terminal records show a pattern, the people responsible answer for it. I was considering purchasing that property before tonight. I will not purchase it without knowing what has been allowed to happen there. You would still buy it after this? If decent people abandon every broken place, only the people who broke it remain in charge. Annie looked at him, then at the photograph of Evelyn beside Margaret Whitmore. Her mother had gone into rooms where people were sick and frightened. She had not fixed everything. She had shown up. Annie picked up Officer Ruiz's card from the table and reached for her phone. What are you doing? Ava asked, though her voice suggested she already knew. I am calling him back, Annie said. I want to sign the statement. Nathaniel Whitmore did not smile or thank her. He only gave a small nod, the kind offered when a person makes a hard decision that belongs entirely to her. As the telephone began to ring, Annie looked once more at her mother's face in the old photograph. For the first time that evening, the future did not feel like something she was waiting to receive. It felt like something she had chosen to protect. Annie signed her statement the next morning at the small kitchen table while Ava stood at the stove stirring oatmeal she kept forgetting to eat. Officer Ruiz read each page back to her before asking for her initials. He did not rush her or speak as though the trouble had begun when she reported it instead of when her wallet was taken. Nathaniel Whitmore arrived after the officer left, carrying a paper cup tray from a neighborhood coffee shop and a folder beneath his arm. He handed Ava a plain coffee with cream and set a hot chocolate near Annie. I thought coffee might make your hands shake more, he said. Annie looked at the cup. Thank you. Ava gave him a searching look, then moved the oatmeal from the burner. You look like a man bringing more than breakfast. Nathaniel sat down. The police obtained some of the terminal footage. It shows the collision near the entrance and one of the young men handling Annie's wallet afterward. Annie wrapped both hands around the hot chocolate. Then it is over? No, he said. It means they can prove what happened to you. It does not yet prove how long it has been happening or who else knew. Russell Crane knew, Annie said. Nathaniel did not disagree. He has hired an attorney. He is also telling the owners of the terminal that I am using your incident to pressure them during a purchase negotiation. Ava placed 3 bowls on the table. A man who cannot defend what he did will always start explaining why the person who caught him should not be trusted. Nathaniel gave a tired smile. Mrs. Brooks, my sister would like you. Then she must have sense. The sister arrived that afternoon while Annie was working her shift at Jefferson Cleaners. Rebecca Whitmore came through the glass door in a camel-colored coat, carrying a leather folder and looking out of place among the rows of washers, wire carts, and customers folding towels under fluorescent lights. Annie was pairing socks when her supervisor called from the register. Someone here to see you. Rebecca extended her hand. Annie Brooks? I am Rebecca Whitmore. Nathaniel is my brother. I serve as legal counsel for his company. Annie wiped her hand on her apron before shaking it. Is something wrong? Rebecca looked toward the customers nearby. Could we speak somewhere private? The only private place available was the employee break room, where a vending machine hummed beside a table covered with old coffee rings. Rebecca sat across from Annie and opened her folder. This was posted online an hour ago, she said, turning her phone around. The video had no sound at first. Annie saw herself in the terminal, standing in front of Nathaniel with her folder held against her coat. Then came a cut. Nathaniel at the counter purchasing her ticket. Another cut showed him carrying her suitcase outside later that night. The caption read, Teen Scholarship Applicant Targets Wealthy Investor at Milwaukee Terminal. Annie stopped breathing for a moment. That is not what happened. I know. It does not show my wallet being stolen. No. It does not show Russell Crane dismissing me. No. Annie pushed the phone back as though touching it might make the lie cling to her. Where did they get this? We believe someone connected to the terminal provided selected footage to a local blogger. The post names your scholarship program. Annie stood so quickly the chair scraped the floor. They named it? Rebecca nodded. Nathaniel wanted me to tell you before you heard from anyone else. Her phone rang before Rebecca finished speaking. Annie saw the name of the scholarship coordinator on the screen and felt cold spread through her chest. She answered, Hello? Miss Brooks, this is Susan Meyer from the Florence Hale Scholarship Program. Is this a bad time? Annie looked at Rebecca. No, ma'am. We have received a message raising concerns about outside financial assistance connected to your interview travel. I want to be clear. No decision has been made. However, the committee must review any question concerning applicant integrity before announcing awards. Annie lowered herself into the chair. A man bought my fare because my wallet was stolen, she said. The police have my statement. They found my identification. I understand. You will have an opportunity to provide documentation. Until the matter is reviewed, your final determination will be placed on hold. Placed on hold. The words were neat and official, but Annie heard what sat underneath them. Someone had lied about her, and now she had to earn back a truth she had already lived. After the call ended, Rebecca said, We can respond quickly. The police record, the recovered identification, The unedited footage once it is formally released. My scholarship is frozen because he made me look like I went looking for a rich man. Rebecca paused. Yes, Annie laughed once, without humor. At least you said it plainly. Her supervisor appeared in the doorway, her face uncomfortable. Annie, I saw something online. A customer recognized you and made a complaint. I am not saying I believe any of it, but perhaps you should take the rest of today off. I need these hours. I know, just until this settles down. Annie removed her apron, folded it once and set it on the table. She did not cry until she was outside, standing under the awning while cold rain darkened the sidewalk. Nathaniel was waiting at the curb in his sedan. Rebecca must have called him while Annie collected her things. He got out when he saw her face. I am sorry, he said. Annie opened her purse and pulled out an envelope. It held the money from her last 2 shifts and what little she had managed not to spend after returning from Madison. She placed it in his hand. $43. Nathaniel looked at the envelope. What is this? The fare. Take it. Annie, no. Take it. Then nobody can say I used you for anything. He held the envelope but did not open it. A ticket is not a chain. I did not purchase a place in your life, but he made it look like you did. Her voice broke despite her effort to keep it steady. I studied. I worked. I showed up. I told the truth. And it still sounds cleaner when a man like Russell Crane calls me a liar. Nathaniel glanced toward Rebecca, then back at Annie. Then we stop answering in private, he said. What does that mean? Russell Crane has scheduled a public meeting at the terminal tomorrow. He intends to deny any wrongdoing and question my motives in front of reporters. Nathaniel handed the envelope back to her. He believes you will be too ashamed to walk into that room. Annie closed her fingers around the money. For a moment, she saw the terminal as it had been that night. The metal bench, the closing coach door, Russell Crane's face when he decided she was not worth listening to. What happens if I go, she asked. Rebecca answered this time. He will try to make you doubt yourself in public. Annie looked through the rain at the traffic moving past the laundromat. And if I do not go? Nathaniel said quietly. He gets to tell your story without you in the room. That evening, Annie placed the returned wallet on her grandmother's kitchen table and told Ava everything. Ava listened without interruption, then reached for the old photograph of Evelyn beside Margaret Whitmore. Tomorrow, she said, you do not go there to beg them to believe you. Annie looked at her. Then why do I go? Ava slid the photograph across the table. You go because your mother raised no liar, and Russell Crane has mistaken your quiet for permission. The rain continued after dark, tapping against the kitchen window in a steady rhythm while Annie sat at the table with her untouched dinner in front of her. Ava had made baked chicken and rice, the kind of meal that usually filled the apartment with comfort, but Annie could not swallow more than 2 bites. Her phone lay face down beside the returned wallet. Every few minutes it vibrated with another message from someone who had seen the video or heard about it from someone else. She had stopped reading after a girl from her graduating class wrote, I thought you were better than this. Ava carried Annie's plate to the stove without comment. She covered it with foil and opened the refrigerator. You can eat later. I am not hungry. You will be. Trouble does not excuse a person from breakfast. Annie almost smiled, but the knock at the door came before she could answer. Ava stiffened. At this hour? Annie rose. It may be Nathaniel Whitmore. It may also be someone who has no business here. Look first. Annie checked through the peephole. Nathaniel Whitmore stood in the hallway holding the silver tin box beneath one arm. His gray coat was wet at the shoulders. He looked less like the man who had sat calmly in a coach terminal and more like someone who had driven across the city while trying to settle an argument with himself. She opened the door. I hope I am not too late, he said. Ava appeared behind Annie. A man carrying history in a rainstorm is already late for something. Come in before you ruin my floor. Nathaniel Whitmore entered and wiped his shoes on the mat. He set the tin box on the kitchen table, but he did not open it immediately. Annie remained standing. Did something happen? Yes, he said. Russell Crane's attorney circulated another statement this evening. He claims I offered you financial support before the scholarship interview and that the theft story was created afterward to explain it. Annie gripped the back of a chair. The police know that is false. They do. But tomorrow is not only about the police investigation. He wants the public to remember the accusation, even after the facts catch up. Ava pulled out a chair. Sit, Annie. This time Annie did. Nathaniel Whitmore placed both hands on the tin box. When I showed you the photograph, I did not show you everything inside. At the time, it felt too personal. Then after what happened today, I realized I was still deciding what you were ready to know, instead of allowing you to decide for yourself. He opened the lid and removed the photograph Annie had already seen, placing it on the table. Beneath it lay a narrow cloth pouch, faded at the seams, and 2 folded pieces of paper. Nathaniel Whitmore handed Annie the pouch. Inside was a small enamel pin, white with a blue border. The lettering had worn thin, but she could still read it. Evelyn Brooks Home Health Aid. Annie pressed it into her palm. The pin was light, almost weightless, but it made her sit straighter. My mother kept it after Evelyn left our home, Nathaniel Whitmore said. She told me Evelyn had forgotten it one morning. I offered to mail it back. But my mother said Evelyn would return the next day and she wanted to give it to her herself. She never did. That was the week my mother's condition worsened. Ava touched the edge of the pouch. Evelyn thought she had lost this. She looked for it for months. Then it should have been returned long ago, he said. Annie turned the pin over in her fingers. Why did your mother keep it? Nathaniel Whitmore unfolded the first paper. Because it was wrapped inside this. The handwriting was small and slightly uneven. Annie recognized none of it, but Ava's breath caught as soon as she looked down. Nathaniel Whitmore read softly. Margaret, do not spend your energy apologizing for needing help. Everybody needs someone eventually. Your son is frightened, and frightened people sometimes hide inside work because it feels like control. Be patient with him, but do not let him stand in the doorway forever. Kindness is not weakness. It is the work strong people choose when nobody is watching. Evelyn. Ava covered her mouth with one hand. Annie could not speak. She had known her mother as a woman in photographs, then as a patient fading from a hospital bed, then as a silence in their apartment that her grandmother never tried to replace. Hearing her words read aloud made her feel close enough to grieve her in a new way. Nathaniel Whitmore slid the second paper across the table. My mother wrote this to me shortly before she died. Annie opened it herself. Nathaniel, there are men who will praise you for building large things. Pay attention to the people who teach you how to be decent inside them. Evelyn did that for this house. Do not forget her. Annie looked up. You did forget her. Nathaniel Whitmore accepted the sentence without flinching. Not her. What she asked of me. There is a difference, but it does not make me look better. Ava studied him over the table. You are telling the truth now. That counts for something. It does not count for everything. No, ma'am. Annie set the letter down. Why bring this tonight? Because tomorrow Russell Crane will stand in the terminal and suggest you approached me for an advantage. He will make your needs sound dishonest and my help sound improper. I cannot decide whether you speak, but I wanted you to know that before you ever sat beside me on that bench, your mother had already shown my family what dignity looked like. Annie stared at the pin in her hand. I am scared, she said. Ava reached across the table. Being scared does not make the truth smaller. What if they still believe him? Some people will, Nathaniel Whitmore said, not because his story is stronger, but because it asks less of them. It lets them keep thinking girls like you are always asking for something they did not earn. Annie closed her fingers around her mother's pin. Then I will make them hear what happened from me. Nathaniel Whitmore did not answer immediately. Are you sure? No. She reached for her phone and turned it face up. But I am done letting Russell Crane explain me. Ava rose, went to the small sewing tin she kept above the refrigerator, and returned with a safety clasp. With careful fingers, she fastened Evelyn's pin to the lapel of Annie's navy coat. There, she said, your mother cannot walk in with you tomorrow, but you do not have to walk in without her. Annie touched the pin once. Outside, the rain had begun to ease. Tomorrow she would return to the terminal where she had sat with an empty wallet and watched her future almost leave without her. This time, she would not be asking for a ticket. She would be bringing the truth. At 10 the next morning, Milwaukee Union Coach Terminal looked cleaner than Annie remembered. Someone had wiped the fingerprints from the glass doors and replaced the overflowing trash can near Gate 7. A row of folding chairs faced a small platform near the service counter, and 2 local television crews had set up cameras where passengers usually waited with paper cups and carry-on bags. None of it changed the bench. Annie saw it as soon as she entered with Ava beside her. The same metal seat where she had opened her banking app and shown a stranger that she had $11.84 to her name. The same overhead lights, the same departure board clicking through places other people could still reach without asking permission. Ava touched Annie's elbow. "Eyes ahead, baby." Annie nodded. The small pin bearing Evelyn Brooks's name rested on the lapel of her navy coat. Nathaniel Whitmore stood near the platform with Rebecca Whitmore, who had a thick legal folder tucked beneath one arm. When he saw Annie, he crossed the floor toward her. "You do not have to answer anything beyond what Rebecca discussed with you," he said. "If it becomes too much, we stop." Annie looked at the reporters, then at Russell Crane. He stood with his attorney beside the ticket counter, dressed in a dark suit instead of his terminal uniform. He appeared calm, almost injured by the inconvenience of being questioned. "He did not stop when I told him my future was leaving without me," Annie said. "I am not stopping because he brought cameras." Nathaniel Whitmore gave a small nod. "All right." Russell Crane's attorney began by calling the meeting an effort to correct damaging public assumptions about the terminal and its management. He spoke of holiday crowds, misunderstandings, and the dangers of allowing a wealthy prospective buyer to exploit an ordinary customer complaint during negotiations. Then Russell Crane took the microphone. "I have spent 12 years serving passengers in this terminal," he said. "On the evening in question, a young woman without funds approached Mr. Whitmore, who then purchased her fare. Only later did allegations of theft emerge. I sympathize with anyone facing hardship, but sympathy should not replace facts." Annie felt Ava's fingers close over her hand. A reporter raised his voice. "Are you saying Miss Brooks fabricated the theft?" Russell Crane lowered his eyes as if reluctant to answer. "I am saying I saw no evidence of a theft at the time." Rebecca Whitmore stepped forward. "That is because you declined to look for evidence." Russell Crane's attorney objected immediately. "This is not a courtroom." "No," Rebecca said. "In a courtroom, your client would have less freedom to perform." A murmur moved through the chairs. Rebecca turned toward Annie. "Miss Brooks, would you be willing to describe what happened?" Annie's legs felt unsteady as she walked to the microphone. The terminal seemed larger from the front of the room. She could see the bench, the entrance where her papers had fallen, and the counter where Russell Crane had looked at her as though missing a coach was a lesson she deserved. "My name is Annie Brooks," she began. "I came here to buy a fare to Madison for a nursing scholarship interview. 2 men bumped into me near the entrance. One picked up my papers. When I got to the counter, my wallet was gone." Russell Crane's attorney stood. "Miss Brooks, did you ask Mr. Whitmore to spend money on you?" "Yes." "And he did?" "Yes. He purchased 1 coach ticket after I showed him my banking balance and told him why I needed to travel." "So you accepted financial help from a billionaire shortly before your scholarship interview?" Annie heard the trap in the question. She also heard her grandmother's voice. "Do not look guilty for being robbed. I accepted a fare from the only person in this terminal who was willing to listen long enough to learn whether I was telling the truth." Someone near the back whispered, "Good for her." The attorney's mouth tightened. "But you did not prove a theft before receiving that fare, did you?" "I tried to report it. Mr. Crane treated my missing wallet as carelessness before he knew a single fact." Russell Crane leaned toward his microphone. "That is not accurate." Annie turned to him. Her fear had not disappeared, but it was no longer making decisions for her. "You asked whether I left my wallet at home. You did not ask what the men looked like. You did not ask where it happened. You told me my missed trip was not the terminal's responsibility." "I followed procedure." "No," Annie said. "You followed what you already believed about me." The room went still. Rebecca connected a laptop to the portable screen behind the platform. "This is security footage obtained by Milwaukee Transit Police, pursuant to their investigation." The first video showed Annie entering the terminal with her suitcase and folder. Dylan crossed in front of her. Marcus stepped close as the folder hit the floor. The enlarged image showed his hand slip into Annie's purse and withdraw the brown wallet. Annie heard Ava take a slow breath beside her. The second clip showed Annie at the counter, speaking to Russell Crane, then walking away without a ticket. No sound was necessary. His body had already turned from her before she finished explaining. The third clip began after Annie's coach departed. Dylan and Marcus returned from the side corridor. Marcus held the wallet Annie had identified. A paper fell to the floor. Nathaniel Whitmore picked it up. When the frame was enlarged, Annie's state identification card was visible in his hand. Russell Crane's attorney rose. "None of this establishes my client participated in a theft." Rebecca clicked once more. A fourth video filled the screen. It came from a camera above the service counter, angled toward the employee corridor. Marcus approached Russell Crane beside a storage door. Russell Crane accepted a folded stack of cash from him, counted it quickly and placed it in his pocket. Dylan stood watch near the corridor entrance. Russell Crane's face changed. "That is not what it appears to be," he said. Officer Daniel Ruiz stepped from the back of the room. "Then you can explain it formally. Marcus Bell was arrested this morning. He has identified you as the person who permitted the thefts and received a share of the cash." Russell Crane looked toward the exit. 2 officers were already standing there. "This is ridiculous," he snapped. "Do you know how many people come through this place with stories? They lose money, miss coaches, make bad decisions, and someone has to be blamed." Annie stepped away from the microphone, then stopped. "How many of them were telling the truth?" she asked. "While you made money from their fear?" Russell Crane had no answer. Officer Ruiz approached him and asked him to turn around. As the handcuffs closed, no one applauded. Annie was grateful for that. What had happened to her was not entertainment, and what had happened to the people before her deserved more than a satisfying ending in front of cameras. Russell Crane was led past the same counter where he had refused to help her. Nathaniel Whitmore came to stand beside Annie. "You did well." She touched the pin on her coat. "I told the truth." "Yes," he said. "Sometimes that is the bravest thing a person can do." Rebecca began gathering her documents, but the reporters had not finished. One called toward Nathaniel Whitmore. "Mr. Whitmore, after what was exposed here today, are you withdrawing your offer to buy this terminal?" Nathaniel looked around the building. The counter, the bench, the passengers watching from near the gates, and Annie standing with her grandmother beneath a departure board that had nearly left her behind. "No," he said. "I am changing what I intend to do with it." The reporter lifted his microphone higher. "What does that mean, Mr. Whitmore?" Nathaniel Whitmore looked toward Rebecca. She gave one small nod, the kind that told him she understood he was about to turn a business negotiation into something larger than either of them had prepared to announce that morning. "It means my company will proceed with purchasing Milwaukee Union Coach Terminal," he said. "Not because what happened here is acceptable, because it is not. A building does not become worthless because cruel people were trusted to run it. It becomes a responsibility." The cameras shifted toward him. Near the gates, passengers who had paused to watch moved closer. Nathaniel continued. "Effective upon completion of the purchase, the management structure of this terminal will be replaced. Every unresolved theft complaint from the past 12 months will be reviewed with law enforcement. Any passenger whose travel was interrupted because this station failed to protect them will be eligible for reimbursement of documented fares and related expenses." A woman in the second row raised her hand before any reporter could speak. She was holding a little boy's winter hat in her lap. "What about people who did not keep receipts?" she asked. "When my purse was taken here, I did not have money to buy another fare, much less save paperwork. My son and I sat in that restroom all night." Nathaniel turned toward her. "Then your statement will be heard, ma'am. The absence of a receipt will not be treated as proof that your loss did not happen." The woman covered her mouth and lowered her eyes. Annie watched Nathaniel differently now. At the bench, he had been a man deciding whether he could trust one girl. Standing in front of the terminal, he was a man discovering what it cost when people in power refused to trust anyone who needed help. A reporter asked, "Are you saying you will provide free travel to anyone who claims to be stranded?" "No," Nathaniel said. "I am saying we will create a system that responds before a child. An older passenger or a young person traveling alone is left without options. Verification and decency are not opposites." Rebecca stepped beside him and opened her folder. "The company will establish an emergency assistance office in this terminal, with direct access to security review, transit police contact, and temporary fare support when a reported theft or crisis would otherwise leave a vulnerable traveler stranded." Nathaniel looked toward Annie and Ava. "The office and its assistance program will be called the Evelyn Brooks Safe Passage Fund." Annie heard her grandmother inhale beside her. For a second, she could not understand the words as a name belonging above a door. Evelyn Brooks was the woman in the small photograph tucked inside Annie's wallet, the woman whose pin was fastened to Annie's coat, the mother Annie remembered mostly through hospital light, hand lotion, and the grief Ava carried without complaint. Now Nathaniel had spoken her name into a room full of cameras. He continued, his voice steady but lower. 23 years ago, Evelyn Brooks cared for my mother during the final months of her life. My family could pay for treatment. What Evelyn gave us could not be purchased. She gave my mother dignity. She gave me an example I did not fully deserve then, and have not honored enough since. Annie looked down. Ava reached for her hand. Nathaniel said, her daughter did not come into this terminal asking for special treatment. She asked for the chance to reach an interview she had earned. She was robbed, dismissed, and then publicly misrepresented because someone believed a frightened young black woman would be easier to doubt than to protect. This fund is not a reward for Annie Brooks. It is a correction for the people this terminal failed before she found the courage to speak. The woman with the little boy began clapping first. Others joined her, not with the noise of celebration, but with the force of people hearing something acknowledged after too long. Annie could not remain still. She stepped away from Ava and approached Nathaniel as the reporters began shouting new questions. Mr. Whitmore, he turned. You did not ask me before naming anything after my mother. His expression changed. You are right. I should have. Annie glanced at Ava, whose eyes were wet but calm. My grandmother should decide whether that name belongs there too. Nathaniel nodded at once. Then it will not be final unless she agrees. Ava approached slowly, leaning slightly on Annie's arm. She stood before Nathaniel and studied him for a moment. My daughter cleaned rooms people were ashamed to be sick in, she said. She changed sheets, cooked meals, and sat with people after families went home. Nobody put her name on anything while she was alive. Nathaniel lowered his eyes. I know. Ava looked toward the ticket counter, then toward the woman holding her child's hat. If her name is going above a door, make sure the door opens for people who need it. Do not turn my daughter into decoration. Nathaniel met her gaze. I give you my word. Then use her name. 3 days later, Annie was folding towels at Jefferson Cleaners when her phone rang. She recognized Susan Meyer's number from the scholarship office and stepped into the break room before answering. Miss Brooks, Susan said, the review committee has completed its evaluation. We received the police documentation and viewed the full terminal recording. The committee found no impropriety involving your travel fare. Annie sat down. Susan continued. Your interview scores, academic record, and volunteer recommendations placed you at the top of this year's applicants. The Florence Hale Nursing Scholarship is yours, if you still wish to accept it. Annie pressed a hand to her mouth. Yes, she managed. Yes, ma'am, I accept. When she reached home, Ava was at the kitchen table clipping coupons. Annie placed the scholarship letter beside her scissors. Ava read the first line and began to cry before Annie did. That Sunday, Nathaniel arrived at their apartment carrying flowers for Ava and nothing expensive enough to embarrass Annie. The table held roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, cornbread, and a peach cobbler cooling on the stove. Annie handed him a small card before he sat down. He opened it. Thank you for the ticket. Thank you even more for believing I deserved the road beyond it. Nathaniel folded the card carefully. I believe this is the dinner you promised. Annie smiled. I told you it would be a good one. Ava set the cornbread on the table. Sit down, Mr. Whitmore. Food gets cold while grateful people talk too much. Nathaniel laughed and took his seat. Before Ava served the chicken, she looked at him across the table. Kindness is not a debt, Mr. Whitmore, she said. It is a duty we inherit. Annie touched her mother's pin at her collar. For the first time, the future ahead of her did not feel like a door she was waiting for someone else to open. It felt like a door she would one day hold open herself. 6 months later, the first warm rain of April washed the last gray salt from the Milwaukee sidewalks. Annie stepped off the city coach with a canvas book bag over one shoulder and a stack of anatomy flashcards held together by a rubber band. Her first semester in nursing school had taught her the names of bones, the stages of wound healing, and how little sleep a person could live on when she wanted something badly enough. The scholarship did not make life effortless. Annie still worked 2 evening shifts each week at Jefferson Cleaners and spent Saturdays reviewing clinical skills in the apartment kitchen while Ava corrected her pronunciation of words she did not understand. But the rent was paid on time. Ava's arthritis medication no longer waited until the next paycheck. The leaking faucet beneath the kitchen window had been repaired, and the old photograph of Evelyn Brooks standing beside Margaret Whitmore now rested in a simple frame on the wall. Ava had refused Nathaniel Whitmore's offer to replace all their furniture. There is nothing wrong with my table, she had told him. People have eaten honestly at that table for 30 years. Nathaniel had learned not to argue. Instead, he came by for Sunday dinner once or twice a month, usually carrying flowers from the grocery store or a newspaper folded under his arm. He asked Annie about school. He let Ava complain about the Milwaukee Bucks as if he had been hearing it all his life. He never offered Annie money again unless she asked a direct question about the scholarship fund or the terminal. She appreciated that more than she knew how to say. That Thursday evening, Annie crossed the street toward Milwaukee Union Coach Terminal. The building had not changed into something grand. It was still a place where people hurried in with damp coats, children dragged stuffed animals by one arm, and older travelers checked their printed itineraries 3 times before sitting down. But the lights were warmer now. The restrooms were clean. Cameras covered the entrance and service counters. Near Gate 7, beside the row of metal benches Annie would never forget, a new glass door stood open. Above it was a blue sign with white lettering, Evelyn Brooks Safe Passage Room. No one loses a future here because they were afraid to ask for help. Annie paused each time she read it. Not because she doubted it belonged there, but because she wished her mother could have stood beside Ava the day the sign was installed. Ava had touched the lettering with 2 fingers and said only, "Keep the room worthy of her." Then she had gone inside and rearranged the coffee cups because she did not like where the staff had placed them. Annie volunteered there on Thursday nights. The room offered hot coffee, phone chargers, clean blankets, bus schedules, language assistance, and emergency travel review for people who had been robbed, abandoned, or stranded while traveling alone. Nobody received a ticket without basic verification, but nobody was dismissed before being heard. That night, Annie was at the desk reviewing pharmacology notes between visitors when a young man stepped through the open doorway. He was black, perhaps 17, wearing soaked sneakers and a hooded sweatshirt too thin for the rain. A worn backpack hung from one shoulder. In his hand was a damp sheet of paper, folded and unfolded so many times that the creases had begun to tear. He stopped several feet from the desk. "Ma'am?" Annie looked up. She was only 19 now, but the badge on her lanyard and the nursing textbook beside her seemed to make him decide she was an adult who might know what to do. "Yes, come in out of the rain." He stepped onto the mat but went no farther. "I was told maybe somebody here could help." "What happened?" He gave a quick glance toward the terminal, as though worried someone might hear him asking. "My wallet is gone. I had it when I came in. I am supposed to take the coach to Chicago tonight." He placed the paper on the desk. "I have an interview tomorrow morning for an automotive training program. I know it sounds bad. I know people say things to get free rides, but I only need 1 ticket." The words reached her with the force of a remembered voice. For a moment, Annie saw not the boy in front of her but the wet glass, the closing gate, and Nathaniel Whitmore looking up from his tablet while she tried not to fall apart in public. She stood. "What is your name?" "Malcolm Reed." "Do you have your phone, Malcolm?" He nodded. "Any identification stored on it? School account, email confirmation, anything with your name?" "I have the email about the interview. My school counselor's number too." "Good. You are going to sit down, charge your phone and show me what you have. I will call security so they can start reviewing the entrance cameras now." He blinked at her. "You believe me?" Annie did not answer too quickly. She remembered what it had meant for someone to examine the facts rather than turn sympathy into either suspicion or carelessness. "I believe you deserve to be heard before anyone decides what happened." She brought him a towel for his hair and a cup of hot chocolate from the small machine near the cabinet. While Malcolm opened his email, Annie contacted the terminal security supervisor. The new process was simple. Record the report immediately, preserve the relevant video, verify urgent travel when possible, and issue temporary fare support when delay would cause serious harm. Within 15 minutes, they confirmed Malcolm's interview email and reached a counselor from his high school who knew exactly where he was supposed to be the next morning. Security was still checking the footage, but the coach to Chicago would board in 20 minutes. Annie printed the emergency fare authorization, then a ticket. Malcolm stared as she slid it across the desk. "Sit somewhere warm while we find your wallet," she said. "You are not missing that interview tonight." He picked up the ticket carefully. "I can pay it back. I work weekends at my uncle's shop." Annie smiled. "Get to Chicago. Do well tomorrow. Someday, when somebody stands in front of you needing one fair chance, remember this night." Malcolm nodded. unable to speak for a moment. Then he gathered his backpack and headed toward his gate, turning once to lift the ticket in thanks. From the hallway outside the room, Nathaniel Whitmore had watched the final part of the exchange. He wore no business suit that evening, only a raincoat and a tired expression after a board meeting upstairs. Rebecca stood beside him with a folder under her arm. "Are you going in?" she asked. Nathaniel looked through the glass at Annie, who had returned to her desk and was writing Malcolm's case number beside the security request. "Not yet," he said. "This moment belongs to her." Annie noticed him a minute later. She came to the doorway, smiling. "You were standing there long enough to be accused of spying. I was observing an effective employee of a fund whose board meeting just ran 40 minutes too long. I'm a volunteer." "An effective volunteer, then?" Rebecca lifted her folder. "For the record, we approved funding for another year." Annie looked from Rebecca to Nathaniel. "Grandma will want you both for dinner Sunday. She made too much peach cobbler last week and blamed it on missing company." Nathaniel smiled. "Tell her I will be there." The boarding announcement for Chicago sounded through the terminal. Across the concourse, Malcolm handed over his ticket and climbed aboard the waiting intercity coach. Annie watched until he disappeared behind the door. She touched the small pin fastened to her lanyard. Evelyn Brooks, Home Health Aide. 6 months earlier, Annie had believed a ticket was the thing that saved her future. Now she understood it was only paper until someone decided the person asking for it was worth listening to. Behind her, the safe passage room remained open, its light spreading across the terminal floor as another traveler approached the door. This story reminds us that people should not be judged by their clothes, their bank balance, the color of their skin, or the moment in which they are forced to ask for help. Annie did not need pity. She needed one fair chance to reach a future she had worked for. Nathaniel learned that kindness is more than giving money. It is taking time to listen, to seek the truth, and to use one's power to protect those who are often ignored. A single ticket changed one young woman's life, but real justice began when that kindness became an open door for others. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.